Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and participants, welcome to the webinar on challenges and best practices in human trafficking policy, legislation, investigation, and victim support services for male victims, the fourth in the series. I would like to extend my deep gratitude to Michel and the organizing team, as well as the Sovereign Order of Malta for hosting. My name is Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco, and today I am honored to represent the U.S. Council on Violence Against Men and Boys as their co-founder and global ambassador, helping to bring together key individuals from around the world to address these very important topics and hopefully lead to transformative change. It is my pleasure to introduce the distinguished panel of experts who will be sharing their invaluable insights and experiences into this critical field. First, we have the incredible Cristian Eduardo. He is an advocate, speaker, and educator for anti-trafficking initiatives. He is a survivor of international and domestic human trafficking, a Mexican immigrant, a person living with HIV, a member of the LGBTQ+ community, and someone who speaks openly about mental health challenges that he has faced that frequently resulted from trauma. Cristian Eduardo is a survivor leader at New Yorkers for the Equality Model, New York State Anti-Trafficking Coalition, and New Jersey's Coalition Against Human Trafficking, Alliance to End Human Trafficking, and a member of the PAX USA Survivors Council. He is the co-founder of the United Immigrants of New York and Mujeres en Resistencia, coalition of advocates focused on creating awareness and education about gender-based violence, including femicide, and connecting the Spanish-speaking community with accessible resources. Cristian is truly an inspiration in his field, and he brings real change to the United States and abroad. Second, we have Hollywood. She is a researcher and educator with Brave Education and is focused on human trafficking and exploitation. She is a vice chair of the Ottawa Coalition to End Human Trafficking and the chair of the Advocacy Committee. She recently finished her Master's of Legal Studies, and her thesis focused on police responses to sex trafficking in Ontario, Canada. She is currently focused on completing a PhD in sociology with a specialization in criminology, focusing on why young men and boys become traffickers and buyers. Her extensive background in policy and legislation, child welfare, prevention, education, criminal defense, and improving government processes make her a force to be reckoned with. She is currently working on a 5-year research project to bring intersectionality, age-appropriate, and survivor-led, trauma-informed sexual exploitation prevention education to every curriculum and community in Canada. Thank you all for coming here today and sharing your knowledge so that we can truly make a change in the field of human trafficking, especially for male victims that are often forgotten about. Today, we will be uncovering these challenges and lessons learned surrounding policy and legislation, investigation, and victim support, specifically for male victims. And in this webinar, we will embark on a journey to examine the unique complexities in this field and what we can do better as frontline professionals. While discussions on human trafficking typically center on the experience of women and children and girls, the plight of the male victim remains a silent struggle. And this session aims to dismantle those stereotypes, breaking down the social preconceptions, and to address the hurdles that impede human trafficking efforts, especially in cases that involve men. And from the inadequacies in existing policies, legislations, to the nuances in investigating cases with male victims and the challenges inherently providing tailored support services, this webinar will navigate the multifaceted landscape of male trafficking survivors. As we delve into the critical dialogue, our distinguished panel of experts will share insights, research findings, and real-world experiences, fostering a comprehensive understanding of the issues at hand. And together, we aim to inspire a paradigm shift in the discourse surrounding human trafficking, recognizing that men and boys are victims too. Join us as we confront the challenges head-on, striving for more inclusiveness, effective approaches to combating human trafficking, and support for all survivors regardless of gender. And the journey towards eradicating this global crime begins with acknowledging and addressing the unique struggles faced by all victims. And this webinar serves as a pivotal step in that direction. Together, our panelists will shed light on the challenges, lessons learned, and areas of improvement in human trafficking policy, legislation, investigation, and victim support services for male victims. And their expertise will undoubtedly contribute to our understanding and advancement in this vital field. So thank you for joining us, and let's embark on this enlightening journey together.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Challenges and Best Practices in Human Trafficking for Male Victim Survivors. My name is Cristian Eduardo, and I am a survivor leader and a human trafficking consultant. Today, we're going to cover a little bit about who I am, how I got started in the human trafficking sector, a little bit about myths about sex and labor trafficking on males, barriers for victim identification, and some tips and best practices. And I want to start letting everyone know that I'm going to be talking about sex and labor trafficking, so probably sharing a little bit of my story. So I just want to make sure about the content warning. If you feel that you need to take a break, turn off the camera, or do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable. Make sure to listen to your body and stay present. So let's start. So as I say, my name is Cristian Eduardo. I'm a survivor leader and a human trafficking consultant. I am a survivor of international domestic sex and labor trafficking. My trafficking experience started in Mexico. I was trafficked into Canada. In Canada, I experienced sex and labor trafficking. On the side, I was coerced to engage in commercial sex acts, and in the labor trafficking was in the food and cleaning industry. After almost 6 months, I left Canada and I arrived to the United States, where after my arrival, I was without friends, without family members. I didn't know really what to do. And by that time, I didn't know that what I experienced in Mexico and Canada was human trafficking, sex and labor trafficking. I was just experiencing the impact of my trafficking experiences. My body was showing signs of trauma. I was afraid of people, having nightmares, flashbacks. I was really anxious and things like that, but I didn't have a name. It never crossed my mind that what I experienced had a name, that I could ask for help. Also, after my arrival to the United States, I have been living in New York City since my arrival. So after a month, I was diagnosed HIV positive. So I'm a person living with HIV, and I didn't know how to navigate the healthcare system, how to get medication. I was very afraid about if I was going to die. On top of that, I was dealing with the impact of trauma, the sexual trauma, and the trauma of being labor exploited. So, and also I didn't have the language. I didn't know how to ask for help. So, and so many things were happening at the same time. Sadly, this opened the door in New York City for being trafficked again, under the premises of support, get access for medication, get access for a place to live, get access for a space where I could be me. I was sex and labor exploited again. And this time, the labor exploitation happened in the nightlife industry. In a bar, I was labor exploited as a bartender and doing also cleaning in the same space. At the same time, I was expected to engage in commercial sex act with the customers. So it was a very, very complex situation. And again, I didn't know what was happening. I was very afraid of dying, especially with my diagnosis of HIV. I was very afraid of immigration. I was very afraid of being deported. a couple of months after I escaped my trafficking situation, because things were escalating. The abuse was not only like emotionally, physically, sexually, the labor exploitation, but also it was moving towards physical violence. So I escaped. The aftermath of my trafficking experience, I will say that it was very hard, because I didn't know that there was a name for my experiences from Mexico, Canada, and New York City. So I was looking for resources. I wasn't fluent in English. I was very afraid of like how I'm going to get my medication, how am I going to live, how am I going to pay rent, am I allowed to work? Um, and really it was like this, also this stigma, I think, that from Mexico, that because I'm a male, even if I'm a gay male, I needed to be strong. I needed to just man up and deal with whatever situation was happening. And it was very, very, very hard for me to navigate um, this dissonance of me requiring help, but at the same time not knowing how to do it. So I became an advocate for immigrants and LGBTQ plus rights. I started collaborating with a lot of nonprofit organizations, with community organizations, and I noticed something very interesting, that my story wasn't the only one. That other males, other immigrants, other gay males experienced the same, and nobody was talking about this. After some couple of months, I will say that after a year more or less, I found another organization who start asking the right questions. How did you arrive here? What happened? What happened where you were staying? Um, and it took me like several sessions. I remember that the first person who offered me like legal support, really we went through a lot of sessions asking me about my story, asking me about like my living conditions, how I was working, how I was engaging, my fears. So it was a learning process for me. It was a learning process for me, and also it was to creating this trust. Um, in some other instances, in some other organizations, because I'm a male, I didn't have any physical signs of abuse. I was just disencouraged. There is no help here for you. We cannot help you with any resources, and you don't qualify for resources. One other big thing is that while I was receiving finally legal services and immigration services, I didn't qualify for a lot of other programs because I am male. Most of the programs were exclusively for women and girls, and that was very shocking to me because I was continually engaging and living in transitional housing, in male shelters, and there was a lot of violence. I was discriminated against because I don't fit the stereotype of being masculine. So I went through a lot of things even when I was receiving support. So, and through all this advocacy, through all this learning process, I decided to start talking about male victims and survivors, because nobody was talking about this. Still, there are not enough male specific services, and there is still a lot of barriers to self identification for organizations to work with male survivors. And there is still a lot of stigma, stereotypes about male victimizations. But let's go a little bit deep about through my history and some things that I learned through it. So I want to cover a little bit about some myths about sex and labor trafficking on males and some things that I saw through my story. So one of the big things that I saw, and I have been seeing through all these years that I have been working in the anti-trafficking sector, is that sex trafficking only affects women and girls. This is a myth. I hope that everyone knows here that sex trafficking, human trafficking affects everyone, regardless gender, regardless sexual orientation, regardless religion, regardless country of origin, regardless language. But it's interesting to know that most of the services are specific for woman and girl. And when I say specific, the problem or the issue is that in order to access these services, you need to be a woman. This happened to me. I was really looking for housing services. I was really looking for other forms of support while I was navigating the aftermath of my experience, and I didn't qualify for a lot of them. So there was one study here in New York City that shows that 50% of the sexually exploited children were boys. There are some other studies that put that number in 13, 20, 25. This shows that when we start paying attention on men and boys, we start seeing that victims and survivors are also males. One big myth also that I have seen is that sex trafficking only affects LGBTQ plus individuals. One of the big things that I saw while looking for resources as a male, I interact with shelters, I interact with health clinics, I interact with community organizations, I interact with so many different systems all across the city. And most of them have intake forms. Some of the questions that are in the intake form are to screen for sex trafficking. One question that I was asked over and over again, it was, have you ever exchanged sex for something of value? And my answer was yes, but there was never a follow-up. There is this idea that LGBTQ plus individuals engage in the sex trade, engage in prostitution by choice. And while doing this intake, there's no follow-up, there's no training on staff. And also, what I have seen is that in a lot of these spaces where there's only male clients, the intake form doesn't have this question or is not being asked, because it's this idea that males engage in sex or in the sex trade because of free choice, because we just wanted to be there. But remember that sex trafficking affects males across all sexual orientation. One big thing that I want also to emphasize here is that because a male is a survivor or has been a victim of sex trafficking, that doesn't equal that he is part of the LGBTQ plus community. In other words, a male who has been exploited or has experienced sex trafficking doesn't mean that this male identify or it is a gay male. So it's very, very, very important to do this because I have seen that a lot of times there is this idea that all males that are engaged on the sex trade or that have been experiencing sex trafficking are by default part of the LGBTQ plus community. That is not true. This is a big one, and I think that this is a huge, huge barrier that we need to overcome. Most of the literature, most of the trainings say, and even people, all traffickers, exploiters, and service buyers are males. And this is a huge barrier because this creates the idea that as a male, I don't deserve support. As a male, I don't deserve services. As a male, I cannot be a victim. As a male, I cannot be a survivor. As a male, I cannot experience sex or labor trafficking. The same study that shows that 50% of sexually exploited children were boys, the 40% of boys reported to engage with a female client. Another big myth about that why sex and labor trafficking does not happen on males is that boys and men can escape or can fight back. We have this idea that males' needs are strong, that are physically enough, to stop anything happening to us. We need to remember that on sex and labor trafficking, the most powerful tool that traffickers use is psychological coercion. This can take the form of isolation, threats, the monopolization of perception, and there are different tactics that traffickers can use to coerce individuals, specifically males, in situations of trafficking. Some statistics from the National Human Trafficking Hotline is that in 2021, 48% of the situations of males were labor trafficking, and on sex trafficking, 8% were also males. Boys and men cannot be sexually assaulted. And this is very interesting because we have this idea, and it's very connected with the idea that all traffickers, exploiters, and sex buyers are male. Also, this idea that all males are dominant, that all males are abusers. And so if we follow this train of thought, men cannot be sexually assaulted because we are always the perpetrators. We are strong enough. We are always be in charge. We have the power to prevent any sexually abuse against ourselves. And this is not true. There is a myriad of situations that can lead to a boy and a male to be sexually assaulted. This is some statistics from the Rape and Abuse Incest National Network here from the United States. And it says that 1 out of 10 rape victims are males. And I just want to think about, for all attendees to think about all the barriers that males face when report sexual assault. A lot of times, even law enforcement, the agencies, the same family have a lot of biases, stereotypes, and it creates all these barriers that make the victim of the survivor totally unable to disclose or to ask for support, because it's like, I'm not a male anymore. The power, I wasn't a male or strong enough to protect myself. So now I live in shame and guilt. And we're going to talk a little bit more on the next slide. Here are some barriers for identification, and I have talked a little bit about this. Gender roles. Gender roles plays a big role because we're the ones, especially males, we're the ones who are strong. Males were the ones who are the protectors. Males are the ones who take care of the family. And this leads a lot of times to labor trafficking situation. It doesn't matter how much we need to sacrifice. It doesn't matter how much we need to work. The end goal is to fulfill this gender role. So we cannot be victims. We cannot be survivors. We cannot experience, and we're not going to be able to recognize sex or labor trafficking. Stigma. A lot of times when we talk about stigma, we only talk about the stigma as an individual. Of course, a lot of times individual, it's the personal stigma about fit by the gender roles, about like what is my role in society, what is going to happen to me if I recognize that I am a victim of sex or labor trafficking, that I was exploited, that I was coerced, that nobody forced me physically. But also there is a lot of social stigma, there is a lot of family stigma, and there is a lot of community stigma. It's very, very important to understand that not all communities think as the community that you belong. For some communities, being exploited, not fulfill the stereotype of a male, it's a dishonor not only for the family but for the ancestor, for the whole community. So it's a huge issue. It's not only about the individual, but it can become about the whole community. A lot of times, recognizing and identifying, sharing, asking for support, create question about your identity. And this, again, it has an impact in society, in the family, in the community. When males try to look out for support, oftentimes the abuse, the exploitation, it's minimized. Also, this happened. That's why the circles are interconnected, because of the stigma, because of gender roles. Other males are gonna say, like, you weren't exploited, like you were just working very hard. You needed to sacrifice yourself in order to support your family, in order to support your community. That happened to my dad. That happened to me too. And we normalize this abuse, this exploitation. I have encountered cases and I have heard stories of other survivors where this is the reality, that exploitation is being normalized. And even myself, it was very hard for me to understand that as an immigrant, as a Latino, as a man, that I have these preconceived ideas that I needed to work very hard, that I needed to work. If I was working 12, 14 hours, it was because I was strong, because I was young, because I needed to help my family. Well, in reality, even all these have, my traffickers were using all these coercive elements to continue my labor exploitation. There is a lot of victim blaming when males are unable to protect themselves, and I'm saying unable to protect themselves because now we know that male victimizations has a myriad of concepts and intersectionalities. We blame the males. Oh, you weren't strong enough. You are not male enough to protect yourself. So now you cannot only not protect yourself, but not protect your family, your community. So we are, and again, it's always like minimizing the exploitation, the abuse. Males, this idea that males can only be exploited physically, that there is this idea that males, we don't have feelings, that we need to man up, that we don't cry, so we cannot be abused emotionally or physically. The reality is that that's false. We, through coercion, is the main tool used by exploiters in sex and labor trafficking. And of course, there is also this dichotomy that in society, males, we don't have feelings. And this is true for a lot of cultures, for a lot of communities. But at the same time, on a personal and individual level, we have a lot of shame, we have a lot of guilt, we have a lot of feelings of failure. And this is constantly, this is coming for society, this is coming for the family, this is coming for the community, and it's a 24/7. So when you encounter yourself in a situation of sex or labor trafficking, when you lose your power, when you are constantly experiencing these feelings of shame, guilt, and failure, now there's no way to explain that, oh, nobody was forcing me physically, but someone was coercing me, because the family, the community, the society in general are going to victim blame the male, are going to question like their identity, are going to say like, well, that's not like the gender role that a male should have. A male should be able like to protect themselves 24/7. So all these preconceived ideas that we have, stereotypes, are coming all together to stop, not only as an individual, but also I see it in law enforcement, I see it in community and nonprofit organizations, I see it when I'm training community organizations, even when I'm training senator, congresspeople, city council about human trafficking. I see how all this stigma, these stereotypes, these ideas came out about when, specifically when talking about males and boys victimization. And what we have as a result, that we don't have male-specific services. We don't have funding for services for males. We don't have research for male victimization. Male victims, male survivors is still a taboo topic. I can count with my hands the number of survivors of human trafficking who are openly sharing their experiences and are willing to train and be recognized as male survivors or people who live experience. And also, all these ideas create this language that exploiters, abusers are always going to be males. And all these create a loop that it feeds one each other. So it's very, very important to work on an individual level, on the organizational level, and create a campaign to educate every single community. This can be the Latino community, the Black community, Indigenous community, Asian communities, immigrant communities, about all these preconceived ideas that we have about male victimizations. So, but what can we do better? So some tips and best practices to do better is, on an individual level, is self-reflection. We all have biases, stigmas, stereotypes, and we can discriminate towards male victims and survivors, because we have grown up in this society where we have been told, man up, boys don't cry. We are working towards really deconstructing all this idea, but it's very hard. Some communities, some individuals have been growing up with this, and it's in are their core beliefs. One big thing that I want everyone to understand: men and boys, we are also humans. One big thing that I have seen, and it's on the next bullet point, is that a lot of times service providers are amazing, being trauma informed with both only with women and girls. When it comes with men and boys, we act more rude. We act more like even our body language change. Like we want to show power, we want to show strength. And I have seen it in all areas. So just remember that we are all humans. We all experience pain, trauma impact us. And I think that just remember that trauma-informed approaches need to be implemented regardless of identity. There is one thing on the individual level that I want to highlight. A lot of times when males disclose about their victimization, if there are other males in the room, there can be a triggering effect. Because there is no safe spaces for males to disclose their past experiences. I have noticed this in my community as an immigrant, as a Latino. We rarely talk about sexual abuse, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, or any other situation around male victimization, because we are not used to it. So a lot of times, and this is for all the males in the room, if you're working with victims and survivors of sex and labor trafficking, I really encourage you to go to counseling, to therapy, to really navigate and understand your trauma, your triggers, and really don't disclose with your client. Don't be mindful of the power dynamics that are in the room. Something very big also, it's cultural humility. Remember that mental health, asking for help, disclosing about a human trafficking situation can be perceived as weakness in other cultures, in other communities. So be very mindful. I have seen that a lot of times there is this big push that men should be talking, but it's like we are not creating the safest space. We are not creating spaces where we can really talk without being targeted, without being victim blame, without being and it is a really hard process, because society in general still has a lot of stereotypes, so it takes a lot of time. And on an organizational level, it's very important. I think that we are doing it right now, training and education around male victimization, men and boys, and human trafficking. It is a must. I know that a lot of organizations receive human trafficking 101, trauma-informed care, and all these things, but it's very important to understand how male victimization happen, some statistics, and really understand that this is a reality, that it shouldn't be minimized, and that very likely you are going to encounter a male survivor of victim of human trafficking. Inclusive spaces, what is the meaning of this? Men and boys can also experience human trafficking. And this is very connected with the next bullet point: improve screening and enrich material that is inclusive of males. Every single space, it can be shelter for males, it can be substance use spaces, it can be health clinics, every single space where males socialize, where males receive services, there must be trained on human trafficking and male victimization. We are failing to recognize victims and survivors because we are not training, because we are not talking about this, and a lot of the victims and survivors are being silenced. So it's very important to create outreach material, to improve screening, and never minimize when someone is sharing or start sharing a little bit about maybe abuse. Also, take your time, and again, have a trauma-informed approach when interacting with male clients. Build partnership with male-specific services that are trauma-informed. Not all male-specific services are trauma-informed. This is very, very important. And I want to share also something very important. I am a survivor of sex and labor trafficking. And a lot of times my labor trafficking experience is minimized over my sex trafficking experience. I would say that in terms of trauma, in terms of impact, both experiences has had the same impact on me. So never minimize anyone experience. If someone disclose a labor trafficking experience, um, don't think that a sex trafficking experience never happened. If a male discloses a sex trafficking experience, don't think that a labor trafficking experience never happened. And also don't be close to think that males can experience human trafficking. This is a reality. I really interact with a lot of immigrants, with a lot of non-native English speakers, and I'm constantly hearing labor trafficking experiences, sex trafficking experiences, and the reality is that we don't have enough services. We even we for males to qualify for resources, it's very, very hard. We don't have funding, we don't have resources, and these need to change. And also, like the cultural competence on an organizational level, cultural humility, it's on an individual level, but cultural competence is on an organizational level. Understand the cultural differences around gender role, about stigma, stereotypes, and how to navigate the disclosure and how this can impact an individual. It's very, very important. I know that, for example, for a lot of, for here in the United States, it's common to be like, it's okay, nothing is going to happen. It's okay if you're a victim or a survivor, but you don't know how this disclosure is going to affect, in the case of international human trafficking, like it's going to impact the family of the male victim, how it's going to impact the community, how it's going to impact their loved ones, how it's going to impact this individual. So it's very, very important to understand the cultural differences. Never, never, never assume anything. Always ask, always have a trauma-informed approach. I cannot stop like emphasizing on this. And really, really, we need to start really talking about male victimizations. We really deserve services. If we really want to stop sex and labor trafficking, we need to start educating our communities. We need to start tackling all these stereotypes, this stigma, really start creating awareness that sex and labor trafficking can also impact males and boys. And so this is all for me. Thank you so much for being with me today. And I hope that you enjoyed this introductory, like one-on-one on males and boys victims, on best practices for male victims. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much for that presentation, Christian and Holly. So let's begin our panel discussion. Could you please tell me about the work you have done this year in the anti-trafficking field? Let's start with
Perfect. No, thank you so much, Action. Some of the big things that I want to highlight that I have been doing this year is really educating community organizations not only in the United States, or really framework stories. The reality is that survivors are more than that. Survivors can bring expertise. We have lived experience, and this is something that the anti-trafficking movement needs to start changing. I have also been engaged in policy and criminal records for survivors of sex and labor trafficking, and I was also involved. Maine is the first state in the United States. It's also doing this education about what are the realities of sex trafficking. Another really big component that I have been doing this year, and that we also deserve services. I think that a lot of times, even services, even any other material, it's not designed to include the survivor of male voices, and these a lot of times ended up silencing victims and not wanting to reach out for help. So in it, that's just a little bit of the work that I do. I really do consulting, technical assistant, educating organizations, the community. And I think that also like it's very important to educate politicians because a lot of times they don't really know about human trafficking and they are drafting legislation without listening the voices of survivors and the victims that are being impacted by it.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Christian. That is very, very true, and I'm so glad you are doing. So my next question are, what are the challenges, lessons learned, or best practices that you have experienced in your work that you would like to highlight today? Let's start with Christian again.
I would like to say that one of the big challenges that I have been seeing, especially in the Turkey movement on a global scale, is that um, we hyper focus on children. There is a lack of services not only for male victims and survivors, but for adults survivors in general. A lot of times, most of the services intakes and tailored for minors, and it's very hard. I was trafficked as an adult when I was 24, and really looking for services, and it's extremely hard. Adding that to a layer that being a male, it make it more complicated. So that's one of the big challenges. And again, another big challenge is that including survivor voices in the movement. A lot of times, what I have seen is that people think that the only thing that we can share is our trauma, our stories. While in reality, we can create programming, we are live experience, we can do presentations, as we are proving here, so we can really give a lot of expertise, and we need to start changing that. We need to start like having trauma for approaches, not only for women and girls, but really for males and boys, and really start elevating the voices and educating everyone that even when we still have this idea that perpetrators most of the time are males, like there is a lot of victims and survivors that are also males. So, and yes, those are some of the challenges, lessons learned. That just a reminder that burnout, vicarious trauma are very real. A lot of organizations are not taking this very serious. It is very real. We need to be trained on vicarious trauma. Every single organization across the world should take this very serious because tackling human trafficking takes a lot of psychological and emotional draining energy. So we need not only support for victims and survivors, but also for all the amazing people and staff that are really creating all these services and giving support for.
Thank you so much. And your last question today is, can you tell me about any toolkit items, programs, websites, initiatives that you would like to highlight? Let's start with Christian.
Yes, of course. There is one amazing tool that I have been utilizing to train about survivor inclusion that is called the Survivor Equity and Inclusion Framework. This tool, it's a doctoral research by Dr. Shona Powell. We have both been using it to train organizations about how to be inclusive how to implement survivor inclusion in nonprofit organizations, specifically on anti-trafficking organizations. And we can also use this same framework to prevent vicarious trauma from the staff. So I share the link on the chat. Everyone can see it. The doctoral research, you can get it for free if you're a survivor. You can email Dr. Shona Powell, and she will email direct you a copy of the research for organizations. You can buy it, and also if you're interested, like in consulting with me or anything, you can also go to the website. And I'll also share. In New York State, we are trying to working in implementing the equality model. There are some resources over there. There are survivor letters, and as Holly was saying, like there are a ton of research. There's a ton of document, and the main goal in the trafficking movement, I will second Holly, is that we must share resources. We are not going to achieve anything by hiding, taking resources from other organizations. This is about collaboration. This is about learning from one each other and keeping an open mind. Cultural competence is very, very important. And I think that even as a survivor, as a person with lived experience, I don't have all the answers, but we together, we can create best policies, better legislations, and better programming that are going to serve and prevent human trafficking for victims and survivors.
Thank you very much, Christian, for that work.